Hello guys, my name is Yakov Fain. I work for Farata Systems. Today is lesson 15 of our training on Java. We are considering today HTTP sessions, cookies, deployment of WAR files with GlassFish, and intro to JavaServer Pages. First of all, coming back to servlets from the previous lesson. Servlets could be synchronous and asynchronous. What we started last time was synchronous, and we'll continue with synchronous servlets without even touching asynchronous. But the whole idea is that when you have a servlet container, it allocates a thread for each user's request. So from the programmer's perspective, you don't need to worry about the situation of what should be done if I have more than one user hitting my servlet. You have one and only servlet loaded into servlet container. What if you have 100 users working at the same time? Servlet container will create an extra thread to each request. So you program your doGet or doPost or other method in a servlet class as if you are having the only user, which is great. And how this works in a synchronous mode, when the user makes a request, the thread is allocated. Nothing comes for free though. Every thread allocation requires additional resources on the server side. For example, it requires maybe 256 kilobyte of memory, as an example. So if you have 100 users working at the same time, multiply it by 100. How long this memory is occupied? It's occupied for as long as your request is being processed. What if you have long requests? Long, I mean several seconds. Then, of course, several seconds, this thread will be busy and it will take system resources. So what does it mean? It means that if you have certain number of users working with the same servlet, large number of users, how large it depends on the application and on the server, your server may start giving you errors. Errors, it start maybe working very slow and so on. And at some point, it was specification 3.0 when it was discussed by the community, by Java community process. It was back then it was JSR 3.15. Right now the latest JSR for serverless, I believe, is 3.40. So they decided to do something about it and say maybe we can allocate, maybe we can reuse threads for slow operations. Which threads? Threads that are allocated by the container for the servlet. And they came up with so-called asynchronous servlets. And if you remember the web servlet annotation that you mark your class with to make it a servlet, last lesson we looked at it. The URL pattern can be anything. On the last lesson I think it was books. Over here it's bids. And if you will add a second parameter, add async supported true, then you indicate that this servlet will work in asynchronous mode. It doesn't mean that you don't need to program anything after that. There is some programming, but again, we are not covering it in this training. So, how this works in general, just to give you an idea. If a request comes into your servlet, then it gets a thread, and from that thread, you, the programmer, can spawn another thread in an asynchronous mode that will do that slow operation. And the containers thread that was allocated for this request will become free, and it can be allocated to another user. So by doing this, you can tremendously increase the throughput of your servlet container. Okay, let's go a little bit back and let's consider how web browser and servlet communicate. We did this walkthrough last time in the last lesson, but now let's do it from a little bit different perspective. In particular, we are interested in passing parameters, how parameters are being passed from web browser to the servlet. So in this case, we have a form, HTML form for login, and it has a field to enter user ID, it has a field to enter the password, and it has a button submit. When you hit the button submit, then whatever is in the action, it could be a URL, it could be anything, it will be invoked. So the browser creates a HTTP request and send it to the URL listed in here in action. How it's gonna package this request? Remember, this example is for the login. So the user enters some user ID and some password. How the browser will pass these values to the servlet? It depends on the method that you are using over here. If it says method equal post, then the data will be packaged inside the HTTP request, and on the URL it won't be shown. It will not be displayed, which makes sense if you, of course, if you're entering sensitive information like password and ID maybe. So, but if you would be using get method, if you would say I want to make a request to the server using the get method, then whatever you enter on the form, in this case user ID and password, would be concatenated to the URL of the servlet. Browser would put a question mark in the URL, and after the question mark it would list all parameters. What happens on the servlet side? If you remember, the servlet class has a method in it, and if you decide to do something like in constructor, in the regular class you want to initialize some variables when the servlet is being loaded by the container first time, one and only, then you put this code in the init method. Then the service method of the superclass of the servlet is being called. It checks which HTTP request method was used, get, post, put, and so on. Then it calls appropriate servlet method on your class. Of course, you've overridden this method and you put code in there. What do you want to do when the doGet comes in? You get doGet and you get two parameters. One of them is request and the other one is response. From that request, you want to get the parameters, right? Through that response, you will send the response back to the user. HTTP spec has a bunch of methods. How you can send your requests. These are not all of them, but I think there is a couple of more. But these are the main one. People who write servlets usually or pretty often they've been using only the first two. After the RESTful web services became popular, and we'll talk about it in a couple of lessons, then people started to use get, post, put, delete, and I'll explain what it is for. For now, let's just know that they are there and they always been in the HTTP specification. So if it's get, if we decided to use get as a method, then the URL will contain a question mark, and after the question mark there will be some parameters. In this example, I show you an example from an online store. Online store, you want to find a book which has the word Apollo in the book title. So if you have a field on the screen, on the HTML screen, and you have in there a field in the button submit or search, then, and if you enter Apollo, this is how a request may go. What is book title? Book title is a name of HTML field, HTML page field. Like in the previous example, we had the login screen. The name of that field was user, and accordingly the parameter will come as a user and a value. The name of the other field is pwd, and the parameter will come packaged in HTTP request. Again, in this case, because of post, it won't be visible on the URL, but it still arrives to the servlet. In this case, in case of get, this request will be attached to the URL. Okay, next, let's go to the servlet side. What happened there? Say it was a get request, so doGet method is called. We got two parameters, request, response, as an argument, so we can communicate from within this method with the rest of the world. So in this case, we get the parameter book title by saying to request get parameter, and now we got it here. Then we are preparing to respond in this case. in the real world, I would do some more coding, of course. I would maybe create some other classes, implement some business logic, but in this case, I just want to echo the price. Not exactly echo, but at least send the price, as if I know the price of this book. So get writer, get the reference to the I/O stream of the response object, and I specify the content type of the response that I'm about to send. It's so-called MIME type, M-I-M-E. There are different types, and what I'm saying in here, I'm saying I'm going to be sending text to the browser. If I'd be preparing, say, PDF, I would specify accordingly the PDF MIME type. Why browser cares about it? Because it may invoke some browser plugin or add-on to display properly the type that it receives. For example, if you would be sending PDF, maybe your browser would automatically open up the Acrobat Reader plugin or something like this. Maybe if you are sending XML, it would open another program installed on user computer. Maybe if you are sending a comma-separated value and the user has Microsoft Excel installed, it's a spreadsheet program, it'll automatically open up Excel and so on. Then this code attaches HTML fragments to the response and sends them to the browser. So the browser will receive HTML. The browser doesn't care who created HTML, how it was created, was it static, was it dynamic. It gets HTML, it knows how to display it. HTML tag, then the header, we are gluing in the parameter title that we received over here, just to say that the book with this title cost only $65. Our simple servlet will always say that any book costs $65, no matter what book title you will specify. And then please enter your credit card number. We are closing HTML. That's the code. What we don't like about this code, we don't like the fact that inside the servlet we are hard coding HTML. Say, for example, if we want to change the layout of the web page, or maybe coloring, or maybe styling, then a Java programmer would need to open up this program, fix this HTML, recompile the program, and redeploy it. And Java programmers historically are more expensive than web designers. Say we have a team which has a Java developer, Peter, and a web designer, Matilda. Matilda has no clue about Java, but she knows HTML. Her salary is a lot less than Peter's. Peter is a guru, he is a Java guy, he knows servlets. If I need to change the layout of the page, the HTML, where should I go? Who should I ask for it? Of course, I can ask Peter if the code was written this way, and Peter will do the job for me. It'll cost me so much. But if I was able to ask Matilda to fix it, then it would be a lot cheaper for me. I am the big boss. I am the project manager. But to do that, this code, HTML, should be separated, should be extracted. It should live alone in a separate file. Then Matilda probably would be able to do something like this. I'm just trying to create a segue to the topic that is called JavaServer Pages, which we will discuss in about 50 minutes from now. But for now, just remember what I said. Keep it in mind. Workshop number 1. The lesson 27 is a project of Eclipse that we created during the last video. And I don't remember, I'm not that young anymore, I don't remember what did we put in the doGet back then, but I want it to look like the previous slide. I want our doGet to look like this in that lesson 27 servlet. So in your case, you would need to retype the whole thing. And in my case, I believe I already did this. Let me check. FindBooks. Did I do that? Yes. See this doGet? I already copied all stuff from the slide. So it's pretty much ready to go. Let's see if it is deployed, still deployed under GlassFish. Is it? No, this project is not deployed. So lesson 27, add and finish. Now GlassFish synchronizes deployment and it's supposed to be fine. Let's look at it. Let's try to run it. It works fine, right? I can also run it from the browser. It doesn't matter who is the client and what is the client, basically. Let me close that one. Localhost 8080. Just a second. Just give me a second. Localhost 8080. See, with Apollo. Let me change it with a, say, NYC, New York City. It responds. I mean, it's still it's still $65, but it's not important for us. The servlet responds. I'm sending the request from the browser. The servlet understands the parameter and glues in the proper book search that I entered. So that was the thing. Without, if I wouldn't specify parameter, if I would just leave this part without a parameter, we still have in the servlet the code that tries to get parameter. It gets parameter. The parameter is null. So our stupid code just simply concatenates null, which is wrong, but I'm just proving you that the servlet responds. It is what it is. We are not that great at servlets yet, so what we wrote, what we get. Session tracking. What is this about? If somebody will ask you to name the most important characteristics of the HTTP protocol, one of the most important, I would say that HTTP is a stateless protocol. Stateless meaning that it does not remember state of the request. If you have a web page, you press the button submit and you want to find something on the server, your browser creates HTTP request, sends it to the server, the result comes back and the browser does not remember what was there. Not exactly, sorry. The result comes back and it shows the page with maybe resulting content, and the user makes another request to the server, and that other request doesn't remember what was in the previous request. So between the requests, there is no state. So the browser doesn't remember state. Why? Because we are talking about HTTP protocol, and we may need to do something about it. Imagine a situation when you have a bookstore, online bookstore, and you want to add books to your shopping cart, and in that shopping cart, you need to remember that shopping cart, right? I added one book, it was one request. Then I keep browsing on the online store, and I add another book, and I add another book, and everything should be accumulated somehow in that shopping cart. And then there will be a screen that will ask me for the credit card information and for the shipping information. All that should be saved somewhere. My user session should be saved somewhere. And so this is what it is, session tracking. We need to find a mechanism to keep track of a session, of a current session of each user. And each session should be obviously separate. It should be isolated from another user's session. We don't want to get stuff that somebody else put in their shopping cart. There are different mechanisms of storing session information. Of course, you know the word at least, cookies. Did you disable cookies on your browser? You didn't disable cookies on your browser. A cookie is a little small key value pair, little file, actually little object that the server can send to the browser, and browser saves the cookies received, if any, in a special place on the disk, on the user's computer. And this is what makes some users nervous. How come somebody sent me files and saved them on my computer? And that's why illiterate people say, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to allow it. And their friends are more savvy programmers or maybe savvy internet users. They tell them, don't worry, Mary, just disable the cookies and nobody will send you anything. Some websites will stop even working if you will disable the cookies. The other reason for disabling the cookie could be that you don't want anybody who will get a hold of your computer to know where did you go and what did you do on any sites. For that reason, you might want to disable cookies as well. But in most cases, you don't disable cookies. And imagine a situation: you visited some online store, you were browsing books, and then decided not to buy any book. Then a week passed, you come back to the same website, and they said, hello, Yakov, welcome back. During your last visit, you looked at this and this and this book. Do you want to look at them again? How did they know that? Did they save this information in their database servers? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they just, during the last visit, maybe they just sent cookies for each book that you put in the shopping cart. Maybe they saved the cookies and they saved it on Yakov's computer locally. Or maybe they saved just the user ID, Yakov's user ID, as a cookie on Yakov's machine, and next week when Yakov came back, then the browser sent the cookie back to the servlet or to the server. I forgot to tell you that when the browser sends a request to the server to any particular domain, any particular URL, it first checks, maybe I have some cookies local from that site, and if there are cookies, they will be packaged inside the HTTP request. Keep in mind that cookies are not specific to Java. It's a part of HTTP protocol, so regardless of what programming language was used for the server side, the cookies are a valid mechanism. Now, if the cookies were disabled, for example, some websites will do automatic switching to so-called URL rewriting. They will attach the session ID, generated unique session ID, to the URL of the users. So this session ID will go back and forth. Sometimes you probably notice how you go to a website, you go to a page, and all of a sudden the URL becomes longer, and there is something like session ID equal and some weird number. So that's the ID that was assigned to your session by the user. By the server. And on the server side, where do they keep this information that you, for example, that you put this book, that book into a shopping cart? In our Java world, we create so-called HttpSession object. You create an instance of HttpSession object on the server. It's one per user, and in there you can arrange the shopping cart and everything. The next slide contains information that I pretty much explained you already. JSession ID is the one that will be sent to the client. Session ID assigned to the user request. Let's see how we can process cookies. First of all, how to create a cookie from your servlet. Create an instance of the class cookie. Surprise, surprise, this is the name of the class. It's a key value pair, as I said. What do you want to send to the user as a cookie? The key in this case is book name. The value is this, Java programming 24-hour training. You can specify the length of the cookie. Cookies can expire. You can say, I'm sending the cookie, but this cookie will live only so long. In this case, this cookie in seconds, 60 seconds by 60 minutes in an hour by 24 hours. So this particular cookie will live only for 24 hours. If the user will make request from the browser after 24 hours, the browser will check, oh, that cookie is expired. I won't even bother packaging it into HTTP request. So you're adding the cookie to the response, and this is how the web browser eventually will receive it. What if there was a cookie on the client's machine and it came as a part of the request? And you may program your code program your application in a way that relies on the existence of the cookies, right? So a request comes into your servlet, and you ask this request object, get cookies. It's all this is in doGet, for example, or doPost. Do you have any cookies for me? So if there are any cookies, you're going to get an array of cookies right away. Then you can loop through the cookies, through this array, and you know what did you send as an array last time, right? So you get the values, get name, get value, get name, get value, and so on. This is how they can arrange something like, dear Yakov, welcome back. Let's go next. URL rewriting. I already told you this, right? So if the client disabled cookie, the servlet can use URL rewriting for session tracking. Session ID and other data will be attached to the URL. I want to mention it's not a part of this course. Actually, we are running different course, more advanced, and it's a online training for people who already know Java. We call it, what do we call it? Web development, or no, modern web development for Java programmers. In there, we develop an application. It's online auction, and we have two parts: HTML5 part, HTML, JavaScript, CSS. Half of the training we don't even touch Java, and then the Java part. So HTML5 supports something that is called web storage. Web storage allows to store on the user's machine the information which is a lot more structured than simple cookies, and you can store a lot more information there. You can store objects there of a particular structure that you want. It's not, again, it's not a part of our training, but keep it in mind, and if you will need to do something like this, consider web storage as it was implemented in HTML5. Now the code. Let's see how you can create HttpSession object, for example, a shopping cart, and arrange work with it. Say again, we are in doGet method over here, and actually, let's say it's a bookstore. There's a class book. It has title and price. This is something that a person can browse, search, and maybe add to the shopping cart. Objects like this, instances of the class book. So we are in the doGet method of the servlet. The first request comes, and we say request, give me a session for this user. And this parameter true means if there is no session, if this is the very first request, create one. Create a session for me. So the very first time the session is created, then you say to the session, dear session, do you have inside a little something that is called shopping cart that goes by the name shopping cart? Say we know that shopping cart is an array list in our case, array list. If it's the very first time, there is no shopping cart object, right? So if it's null, we want to create a shopping cart, a place to store items in the shopping cart. So we create a new array list. Now, if the user passed the parameter of the books that they want to add to the shopping cart, like Apollo in my previous slide, we create an instance of the book. Right, these are the classes that will be stored in the shopping cart. So we get the parameter book title, maybe we get the price, right, in the selected book in this instance, and then we take this instance and add it to the shopping cart. And then finally we need to take the shopping cart, which is array list, with an instance of the book, and add it to the session under the attribute shopping cart. So we are saying to the instance of the session, I want you to know about this array list, and it'll go by the name shopping cart. So now we got one book. The user browses again. Next time again he hits this servlet, and the servlet engine will try to find out, is there a session for this user yet? Yes, there is. We just created one. Oh, cool. So give me a shopping cart, please. So this time we get a reference to the shopping cart. This time it won't be created again. The second book comes in, and it's added to the shopping cart. And we put it back in a session. So this is how the whole thing works, and eventually the user decide that I'm done, want to pay, and it's time to close the session. So what is the what is a good time to close the session? It depends on your business, of course, that you are programming. If this is an online store where user buys stuff, when the user hits the button place order and enter the information about shipping and billing, this is probably a signal that it's time to close the session. So when it's time to close the session, you make a call session.invalidate. It's the same session object. At this point, the HTTP session object is destroyed. So no more session anymore for this user. If the user will forget, oh my God, I wanted to buy another book, too late. Start a new session and create a new order. Also, you can, if the user forgot to close the session, we want to clean up the memory, right? And maybe the user started browsing the store and then he went out for lunch. So you can specify that this session object will live only so long. After that, by timeout, it will be destroyed automatically. Walkthrough number 2. In this walkthrough, we'll talk about deployment of web modules. In this case, it's servlet. It may be not only a servlet, it could be JavaServer Page, it could be JavaServer Faces, something else. Maybe some web services. So the point is that you can deploy the entire application as one WAR file. WAR stands for Web Archive, WAR. It's a file with extension WAR, but it has a format of a zip file. It's a standard format. So if you want to see what's inside, and we will try to do that today, you can just unzip it and see what's inside. But the point is that we want to create it first, and the structure inside this WAR file should be the same as we have in the expanded version for the web application. Remember, I already told you sometime back that if you have a web application, it has some directory called document root, which in our case is web content in case of Eclipse. And it has subdirectory meta-inf, which may be empty. It has webinf. Webinf is a place where your classes will be compiled, and maybe you will have a library of other jars in there, and so the point is that the WAR file will have the structure of any web module. In this, and how do you create it? There is an easy way and the right way. We will do the easy way today. What is the easy way and what is the right way? The easy way is to ask your IDE to create a WAR file for you. There's nothing easier than that. Right-click on the project, select Export Web and Web Archive, and you'll get a WAR file. Of course, you need to know what to do with it, where to put it, but that's a different story. What is the right way to prepare the WAR file? The right way is to have a script, to use one of the scripting tools like Ant, Maven, Gradle, and the script should be written that will take the proper content of your project and create a WAR file with this content. We will not be covering it as is the right way, but at least the easy way we will explain. But the result will be the same, or maybe the same. You will get one WAR file. So this walkthrough asks us to export the WAR file from our project. This is a project, lesson 27. Right-click, export into WAR file. It asks me, what do you want to export? Lesson 27? Sure. Optimize for this particular runtime? Yes, please, if you can. Where do you want to put it? Where do you want to save it? I want to save it here in my root directory, my users directory on my machine. Save over here and finish. Done deal. So this slide asks you, go and check what's inside, right? Unzip this file. To unzip it, you may need to rename it into zip instead of .war and see what's inside. Let's do it. See this lesson 27 WAR. That's the one that was created just now. I will rename it into zip. Use zip just to unzip it easily. Actually, I'll double click on it. It's unzipped into a folder. Look at the structure of this folder, lesson 27. It has web.inf, it has meta.inf. Basically, if I would have, in this project, if I would have some HTML file, maybe JSP, it would be here in the document root level. But I don't have any of these. So, but I do have classes. See this? I have compiled FindBooks. This is my servlet. That's what I got inside. Just keep it in mind. So the WAR file has the proper structure. The same structure as any web module, even if it is deployed in the expanded version. Let me rename it back to WAR file because we're gonna try to deploy it under GlassFish now. So we got our web application as one WAR file. Of course, we may have multiple classes, but all of them would be sitting inside. Now, what I want to do, first of all, I want to undeploy the lesson 27 if it was deployed in Eclipse. Right click, add remove. It is deployed, right? By the way, where Eclipse deploys its stuff, it might be interesting to see. You have your installation of GlassFish 4 in our case. You have it there. You have domain 1. That's your default domain. I was playing with it yesterday. I was playing with auto deploy and with Eclipse deploy. This is where it is. See Eclipse applications. When you installed a plugin for Eclipse, if you remember, I don't remember if we had to install it or if it was already packaged with Eclipse Kepler. It has GlassFish, GlassFish bundle or something, GlassFish tools for Eclipse. So Eclipse understands the GlassFish as a server. When it was done, Eclipse deploys its project that was targeted toward GlassFish in a special folder under domain that you are running. We are on domain 1, which is the default one. And then check this out. There is a folder Eclipse app, and inside there is a folder for each project. There will be a folder with the content. This is basically where Eclipse deploys stuff for GlassFish. And when I will undeploy the project from Eclipse, let's see what's going to happen here. Just pay attention to this part. Now I'm in Eclipse. I want to remove the project. Finish. See? It's gone. So no more Eclipse apps deployed under GlassFish. That's the place specific for Eclipse. But of course, you cannot depend just on the IDE. There should be different ways of deploying web application under GlassFish or any other servlet container that don't depend on the IDE. There is a folder auto deploy in case of GlassFish. I have it from my experiments. So let me remove everything from there and then we will recreate it now. Auto deploy is another way for deploying web applications under GlassFish. This doesn't depend on GlassFish in any way, on IDE, sorry, in any way. So what do we want to deploy? What do we want to deploy? I have this lesson 27. Lesson 27. WAR file, one WAR file. I want to deploy it. I drag it, copy it into the auto deploy folder of GlassFish. Right? GlassFish 4, domains 1, auto deploy, and so on. It's done. It's deployed. You may need to restart the server, but let's try without restart. Again, as a reminder, in Eclipse we undeployed, right? No, not here. Let's do this. Let's go back to Eclipse. GlassFish, right click, add remove. It's not deployed, right? The server is running. though. The server is running, started from Eclipse, but from Eclipse perspective, we didn't deploy anything under GlassFish. Let's go back here and let's see, refresh. See, it responds. It responds. Why? Because that war file was deployed. How it was deployed, we just copied it into the folder auto deploy. See? It works. So if you have a war file, regardless of how you created it, using the scripting tool or maybe just by simple export into a war file from IDE, you can deploy it this way. Just copy it into, in GlassFish, it's auto deploy directory under domain. In another web servlet container, it would be different. But just read the documentation for that container that you use, and you can deploy your files accordingly. What you need to do, you need to keep in mind, though, that if you put war file in the auto deploy directory and you continue also deploying your code from Eclipse, the war file may have precedence. So you will be surprised seeing, how come I don't see my latest changes? I'm just changing it in the Eclipse. So if you are in the development stage, still remove that war file from the auto deploy directory and work as we did before from Eclipse or whatever IDE you like. So we tried that, it works, right? The 8080, it was responding. Now let's try to look at the deployed application or applications that we have in this GlassFish install. We'll look at it using the GlassFish console. Remember port 4848. If you'll go through this port, it'll open up the console, the admin console from GlassFish. That's the one. And on the left hand side you can see the application node, and it shows you what is deployed right there. See, the lesson 27 is deployed. That's the only one that is deployed now. If I click on it over here, I can see something about it, and in particular I can disable, if I want to, I can disable this application. Not programmatically, as administrator now. As administrator, I can disable it. So the application is still deployed. But if the user will try to hit this app servlet, it won't respond. Let's see. Over here. It was working just a minute ago. Let's refresh. We got 404. Of course, because it is disabled, the GlassFish says, I don't know what you're talking about. There is no such a thing as lesson 27. Let's actually go back here. I can enable it over here as well. You can go it this way. If you have multiple servlets deployed on the same server, which is a regular situation, then you will have multiple rows over here. Let's say I wanted to enable it again. I can hit this button, enable, or I can do it on the same screen we've been before. Enable, right? So it has been enabled. Let's check. Let's do again, refresh. It was 404, remember? It responds again. So system admin can control that. In this case, we were enable disabling, but if we wanted to really undeploy and deploy, then we would be pressing these buttons. So that part is done again. Now the final part of this lesson today is JavaServer Pages. The whole point was to create something that would allow to separate work between web designers who know HTML but don't know Java, and Java programmers who will just write the Java code, no HTML. I already gave you that story with Peter and Matilda. Matilda is less expensive for us to develop. The point is, we don't want to have HTML generated inside the Java code. It's what we want to separate it. And JavaServer Pages is one of the ways to implement it. I want to say that JavaServer Pages is one of the technologies that are part of Java EE spec, but for some reason Oracle decides not to promote it that much anymore, and even the documentation for JSP is not included in the recent versions of tutorials on Java EE 7, not even on Java EE 6. I don't think it's fair. The technology is there, and it's the most popular so far still for web applications. But Oracle wants to push Java Server Faces as a replacement for JSP, and that's why apparently they decided not to put the documentation on JSP in the tutorial on Java EE 7. But it is still there, it works, and most people are using JSP and not Java Server Faces. Even though Java Server Faces also has some merits, especially when you use it with third-party products like Prime Faces library. But again, we don't know about Java Server Faces, and we will not be learning it here and during this course. JSP is popular, people are using it anyway. So the point is, give Matilda HTML to work with, so she can change the styling when the need be, without bothering Peter, who is a Java programmer. And Peter will not have anything to do with HTML. At least this was the plan, the perfect case scenario. Need to remember that the JSP is a simple text file, like you had, for example, index.html. You will create index.jsp, which will look like, you can put any HTML tags in there, plus there is like about 30 tags that come with JSP originally. Check this out. If you have a tag, this markup in the text file, index.jsp. Again, you will have other HTML markup in there, plus something like this. As you can imagine, this is not an HTML tag, right? Angle bracket, % and then equal. But this is JSP valid tag, one of them. What happens is, every JSP turns into a servlet, like a Cinderella, remember? Turns into a princess. Same here. So if you have a JSP, which is again text file with markup, HTML plus JSP markup, the very first time some user will hit your servlet container with a request asking for this particular JSP, it'll automatically, the servlet container will automatically generate a servlet out of it, and it'll deploy this servlet. In some scenarios, you can deploy JSP immediately when the server starts. So in this case, it still will turn into a servlet, but on the server startup. Besides the point, you write JSP, but what will be deployed is servlet. So the fact that you wrote this little simple thing in your text file will actually turn magically into the Java code that you would be writing in servlets anyway, right? Out println 2+2. Out being the reference to the IO stream from the response object. JSP files are saved in the document root folder, not inside WebINF, but in the document root, where you would put other HTML stuff, styling, images, and the rest of the static content. Of course, if you will decide to package the whole thing as a WAR file, you still will put it in the document root, but it'll be sitting inside the WAR file as well. And let's look at this, how this works. Walkthrough number 3. You want to create a new dynamic web project that is named Lesson 28 in Eclipse. Let's do it real quick. Right click, new dynamic web project, Lesson 28. Next. The sources will be sitting in here in SRC. The output folder where classes will go will be in the build directory, of your project. No need to change anything. Next, the context root. This context root will be the part of the URL. Remember, we had this lesson 27 / something else, book, for example. In this case, it's lesson 28. Where the content directory? Where do you want to keep stuff? All this web module structure with the technically, where is your document root? Web content, it's Eclipse convention. There is no need to change it for now. Finish. So lesson 28 is created for us, right? Java resources, nothing there yet. Web content, empty directory. There may be not empty. GlassFish generating their simple files which have nothing in there, and simple manifest which has pretty much nothing in there. So what we want to do, we want to create a new JSP file, as in this walkthrough. Create new index.jsp file using the menu file new, and you'll see it in the web content folder. File new. You can go through other web JSP file. I want to create a new JSP file. I want to call it, where do I want to create it? In here, in the lesson 28. I want to call it index.jsp. Next. Do you want to use any template for creating JSP? Yes, default template works for me. New JSP file. Finish. Done. So what we got? We got this JSP, which looks to you like HTML, right? At least this part is definitely pure HTML, nothing else. But this part up there, this is something that doesn't look like HTML. This tag is already specific to JSP. This is how it was generated. Now, according to this walkthrough, I want to change the body section of this file to look like this. Do I have it somewhere saved? I believe yes. I want to put this inside the body of newly generated index.jsp. Paste. So that's my JSP. Look at this. This is an expression, JSP expression. So when I will run this JSP, I want to see why don't it shows it to me? I guess I need to refresh it. Let me refresh it. Right click, refresh. Yep. Why it created it here? I don't get it. This is wrong. It shouldn't be there. It should be in here, in the web content. Yeah, that's the place. Alright, so I have it here, and when I run it, you will see how instead of this weird looking tag, you will see a result of this complicated computation. Right click on index.jsp, run as, run on server, and you see the result is 4. See? We are running this index.jsp, which was turned into a servlet. Java code was automatically generated, and it works. As you can guess, remember our Matilda, she can easily modify something. Say for example over here she wants to change some styling, add some new content, maybe there are some sales or some promos on that site. Matilda can do everything. We just need to tell her, dear Matilda, please do not touch these tags that you don't know. You know HTML, you are perfect at it, just change anything there. You want to add some cascading style sheets, do it. You want to add some imaging, do it. But leave alone these little tags to Peter. He is the guy who deals with those. Just wondering if you hear that noise behind the window. I'm on the 16th floor in the New York apartment now, and these guys are working. I don't have time, sorry, to record this lesson at any other time, so I hope it's not that loud. Let's go back to the slides. So we did all that, right? So we tested, and you see this code. Let me see, by the way, when I was creating this file, it was automatically deployed under GlassFish. So now we have 2 files deployed, right? Actually, lesson 27 I undeployed, if you remember. Let me deploy it again, just in case. Not that I really need it. Now I have 2 applications deployed under my GlassFish. Lesson 27, lesson 28. If I go to this console and refresh it, I should see 2 applications deployed. And I do. See? GlassFish has really nice console. So I can control and do whatever I want with all these applications as admin. And quick review of the JSP objects that we have. Request. JSP comes with a bunch of predefined variables, meaning that you as a programmer don't need to declare them. For example, in Servlets, you would need to use the argument that we're giving to your doGet or doPost method, right? In JSP, you just assume that you already have it. Request. Assume that you already have response. What do you mean assume? Remember, JSP will be turned into a servlet anyway. During this time, the variable will be created for you, and it works the same route, the same way as with servlets. Request, response. Now, remember how you are trying to get the reference to the I/O stream from the response object to send data back to the user. In JSP, they say, don't worry about it. Just use the name out, and it's a predefined implicit variable that will know about I/O stream of the user. So you can just do something like this. And if you will add something like this code will be turned into a servlet. The servlet will send to the client. Let's assume that we have somewhere a class currency converter. It knows how to convert other currency into dollars. So you call the method getDollarRate, and it'll be sent over to the user, and it'll be placed right there. So the tag that you see here will be replaced with a result of the evaluation of the getDollarRate. And again, over here, as you see, it's not a standard HTML type, it's a JSP type. JSP tag, sorry. And this JSP tag allows you, in particular, to put any Java code in there. Initially, when JSP were created, they said, the whole idea is to help Matilda and Peter work separately. But then they say, actually, you can put fragments of Java code if you want to into JSP, but try not to do that. Try to minimize it. Then some developer said, oh, we can put Java inside HTML, let's do it. And in some cases, I've seen at least projects where you see a mess. HTML tags, fragments of Java code. This is bad. Don't do that. The whole idea was to separate Java code and JSP, so why bother? What's the point? What else? The session. There is a variable in JSP that points at the session object. If it was not there, it will be created for you. Exception. It's a special variable in JSP that you can use to process errors. The only thing is that the variable exception can be used only in special JSP page that was assigned as an error processing page. I'll show you a slide in a couple of minutes. Page context. It's a reference to the context of the page. You can use it if need be, and in particular, you can, by the way, create tag libraries. Tags, like you have HTML tags, JSP tags, you can create your own custom tags that are specific to your application, like shopping, billing, and stuff. You'll see a slide. Configuration, you can use config file with init parameters. So there is a bunch of pre-created implicit JSP variables. I am not going deep into detail of JSP. There is no reason. You can easily learn it. My goal is to give you an idea so you know what you are trying to achieve. Some other JSP directives. See this tag. If the tag starts like this with angle bracket %@ sign, then you can do stuff like say you need to import Java classes. What if you don't listen to me, you decide to put fragments of Java code in there? What if this fragment needs specific class to be imported in Java? So you can, in a JSP, you would add line like this. Directive to import something from Java, otherwise it won't compile, of course. It won't compile by whom? Not by you. You don't compile JSP, but when the JSP will be deployed, it will be automatically recompiled. And if you put in there a fragment of Java which required, in this case, something from Java IO, but you didn't use this directive, the compiler will complain. There's no miracles. You can include other JSP pages into this one, right? Now you can include other files into your JSP. All these are different ways of doing things. You can create a tag library. You can create custom tags that were never in the picture before. Tags in the angle brackets with your own prefixes that you will assign, and we call them tag libraries. Tag libraries could be packaged and created in special files that are called TLD files. And you can say that if you will see a prefix test, angle bracket test, and then something, then find it in the file that is my tag library TLD. You need to create it, of course. We are not covering that. Check it out if you want. The other way to create tags is even more simple. I'll show it to you in a minute. Declarations. If you are mixing Java and JSP and you need some variables, you have a variable and multiple fragments in the Java code that is embedded in JSP needs it. You can declare variables by using this tag. You can have this tag, and somewhere down the road in your JSP code you can create another section like this with a method. You are using this method. Maybe this method will be using the variable salary. Once again, I'm probably being annoying, but still, do not put Java code in HTML. In JSP, try to avoid it by all means. Expressions. We did 2 multiply by 2 in the beginning of JSP section. In this case, it's much more complicated. We take salary variable, assuming that was declared and it has some value, and we multiply it by something. In this exact place where we placed the tag, it'll put the result of this calculation. Comments. If you want to use JSP comments, you can start them like this: angle bracket %dash. But if you will be using JSP comments, during compilation they will be lost and they will not be included in the resulting HTML page that will go to the user. If you want to maintain the comment, you want to keep them intact, then don't use JSP specific comments, use regular comments, HTML comments. Then they will be a part of the page that arrives to the user. What are some other standard actions? Include. I already mentioned that during the runtime you may include the contents from some other JSPs. Typically, if you create a page, you will split it into a bunch of different JSPs. For example, the header of the page will be one JSP, maybe the left menu, navigation JSP, then the footer, then the main content. So you will split it. So your main JSP can have a bunch of these tags include, so it'll include several other JSPs as well. Forwarding and redirecting. If the user is looking at one page and press the button or maybe a link or a menu, and the control should go to a different JSP, then you can use forwarding. So it says the user clicked on something, and at this point you have this forward directive. If you use forward directive, then the command will go to some other JSP that you will put in there, but the request and response objects that you had originally in this JSP, these two variables, request and response, they will be preserved. The same request response object will be given to this some other JSP. If you will be using this line response send redirect to some other JSP, then it's a different story. Then a new pair of request and response object will be created. A new pair. So technically, it'll make another request to the server to create a new, fresh pair of request response. That's the difference between forwarding and redirecting. Error pages. As I said before, we have in JSP you have this implicitly declared variable exception. But as I said, you can use it only on a JSP page that was declared the error page. How it was done. Say you have some other JSP, tax calculation JSP. You have some stuff in there in the HTML code, and one of the directives from JSP there is assigned the error page. It basically says to text calc JSP. Whenever error happened there in this page, if an error happened there, please bring up text error.jsp. That's your page that is responsible for errors. And then, of course, in the text error.jsp, you can use the variable exception to display what exactly happening, what error just happened. Typically, in there you put maybe some logo, some stupid friendly statement, like "Oops, it shouldn't have been occurred. We are so sorry," like that Twitter does. Somebody is at the bottom of the sea. I don't know what your wild imagination will dictate. The phone of the support line, which these days many companies try to hide real far. And then something that can be used by tech support team. Exception message, right? ToString or maybe get message. Don't remember what else is in there. Error processing. Java beans. What are Java beans? In general, Java bean is a POJO, plain old Java object. Originally, many years ago, some of you were not even in the picture yet. In the 90s, this specification was created to simplify creation of custom objects. Custom object being visual custom object or non-visual custom object. In case of visual custom objects, they say you can create your own button, checkbox, any UI control you want. The only thing is you need to help the tooling, help the IDEs, or maybe some visual editors, designers, to create, to introspect, to figure out what inside of your component is. Remember, reflection, introspection. The program can ask the component, what do you have inside? Do you have constructors? Do you have methods, getters, setters? So for that, the spec was created, and it was announced that if a POJO has a no argument constructor, private variables, fields, and getter setters, and or getter setters, then it can be officially called Java bean. And like in this case, on the right hand side, I have a bean. I decided to call it student. In this case, it also implements serializable. It's not a must, but it may be useful if you're planning to serialize it into some stream, or maybe save it in a file, that instance. So I have some private fields. I have a no argument constructor, and I have some getters in this case. This is an example of a Java bean. Java bean is used in many different contexts. In JSP, we can say JSP can use Java beans. JavaServer faces can use Java beans. RESTful services can use beans. Enterprise Java beans. So beans are everywhere. This term is used in many different conversations. When you will hear somewhere managed bean, it means there is some container that knows what to do with these beans. Even third-party frameworks like Spring, for example, they also use this term beans. So in case of JSP, they support Java beans as well. And what are they used for? They are used to be like baked bean, they say. You have an HTML with some JavaServer Pages tags, JSP tags, And behind the scenes, there can be a class, a bean like this, for example, like student, and there's a form on the screen in HTML that matches or corresponds to the bean. So the user enters something on the screen, and we can populate the fields of the bean, Java bean, based on the values that the user put on the form. And how to do something like that? It's pretty simple. In JSP, you put this tag JSP use bean. Which one you want to use? Which bean you want to use on this page? I want to use this student bean. For example, this tag shows you how you can get the value from the property of the bean. In this case, it's I want to get the value of the last name. Go to the bean student and give me the value of the last name and put it here. So this tag will be replaced by the value of the last name. How can you change the last name? Just put a tag using set property. Set property on the bean student. Which property you want to set? I want to set last name. What value you want to give? Smith. So there is a way to communicate between Java server page and the Java class, which is a bean, using again this kind of notation, tags. And finally, tag libraries. This is a slide on tag libraries. Again, no detail, just an idea. You can create custom tags that were never existed before. They are specific to your application. Maybe you like this the whole idea, the whole notation. Look at the last line on this slide. Shop, colon, billing form. What is that? Of course, there is no tags for shopping in standard JSP library that comes from Oracle. This is something that you can create, specific to your application, and use the same notation. How to do something like that? You can create custom tags. Again, there is a tutorial, and maybe you can compile them into tag libraries, TLD files. Or even the easier, you can create a text file with extension in the name tag, something.tag, and put this tag in a certain folder. Say, for example, you can create a simple file called billing form tag. In there, it's a mix of HTML tags and JSP tags. Create this piece and save it. Say a fragment for the login. It can be reusable tag for multiple applications. How to log into your code. Now put it somewhere. Like in this case, I decided to put it under webinf/tags, folder tags. So to use this billing form tag, whatever I put in there, I need to declare in my JSP, I need to say, I have a library, I have a tag library, and it is located in this directory. And the prefix that I am planning to use with those custom tags will be shop. This is what we announce. Now the JSP will know that whenever there is a tag that starts with prefix shop, it knows where to find it, right? It's going to go and find it in the tags folder. Which file it will find? It'll try to find the file that is named billingform.tag. It'll take the content of this file and put it right there where you put instead of this line. The last line will be replaced with the content of the file billingform.tag. That's about it. I guess we are done for today. The homework is lesson 28 from the textbook. If you have time, read about Spring Framework. It has nothing to do with Java Server Pages, but it's a popular framework. You need to know it, and this is something that you may want to invest in. I mean, learning. And there's a whole bunch of links that may help you in understanding of different subjects. Yeah, by the way, over here I put an interesting link. It's about servlet filters. I didn't have a chance to explain you what it is. Just a quick idea. When you create servlets, you can also create a special file that is called filter. The filter is a file, is a code basically that will be invoked before your servlet gets hit. The browser comes in. If there is a filter class, then it will process the request, and then the request will go to the servlet. Or the filter can be processed after the servlet gives the content to the user. So you are sending something to the response object, and then filter can intercept it and do something about it. So this is so-called servlet filters. So we are done with the unit 15. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Yakov Fain. I am from Farada System.